The Honourable Craig Murray is himself a free speech martyr, and we'll be talking to him about that in just a minute. But he's also a historian, a former British ambassador, and an indefatigable human rights activist. And I'm glad to say, after some time away, he joins us again on the mother of all talk shows. Ambassador, thank you for being with us. Let me ask you, first of all, before I get on to the remarkable piece of forensic investigative journalism for which you were responsible a few days ago, what do you make of the fiasco over the British state charging Mo Farah, dropping the charges, the BBC having paid for the rights, cutting away from a headline act, only to discover that the stage they went to was being performed on by a guy even more gung-ho for the Palestinians? Are the people who rule us idiots or knaves, or both?
I think both is a fair conclusion. They've lost control of the narrative. They really have. After many, many years in which an entirely compliant Zionist media was able to control the population, they've really not found a way of reacting to the fact that, Israel being in such an active stage of genocide has been seen by everyone live on their mobile phones, and the vast majority of people weren't put up with it. But the state is still in denial mode, where it feels it can suppress the truth and suppress pro-Palestinian feeling. But actually, it's way beyond that. And politicians just don't know how to cope, and the media don't know how to cope, and the police don't know how to cope. We're in a situation where we have a fractured state flailing around, kicking its legs like a dying cockroach.
That's a powerful metaphor. We have an aroused people, don't we? I mean, I'd never heard of Kneecap, never heard of Bob Villan, but I'm following them now, and I'm downloading their tracks now. Even if I don't listen to them, I'll definitely download them. They are charging people, not just like Mo Farah, but they've charged Palestine Action with throwing red paint on a warplane with terrorism, and they're going to proscribe them. The state is still digging in, doubling down, disobeying that old saw, when you're in a hole, stop digging. They're still digging.
They are still digging. And one of the ways that popular resistance is now showing itself is that there have been so many jury acquittals of Palestine Action. And that's a problem they're going to face, even under the terrorism laws. The parts of the terrorism law they would be charging Palestine Action with, they're going to have juries. They're not going to have juryless trials. So their ability to enforce it, they can stick people, as they're doing increasingly with Palestine Action, they can stick people for months on remand into jail. But the extent of popular rebellion against what they're doing is just far beyond what they can cope with. I saw a very amusing tweet from our friend Barrister Akanji today, in which he suggested that Palestine Action are going to rename themselves Yvette Cooper, so that they'll have to prescribe Yvette Cooper, which will be would be great.
For international viewers, we should explain she's the factotum of Keir Starmer, Home Secretary, who is introducing this proscription and is at the wheel of this attack on Palestine Action. Now, a man of your erudition has certainly read Joseph Heller's 20th century masterpiece, Catch-22. And in Catch-22, a fella called Milo Minderbender was renting out his own air force to the Nazis to bomb his own forces. on the principle that business was business after all, and America's business was business. We now discover that our warplanes are leased from hedge funds, and we discovered it thanks to you. Tell us more.
Yeah, I mean, I should say nobody was more shocked than I was by what I discovered. I didn't start off by the journey expecting that to be the destination. I saw that that Auto Traders Limited, a private company, was leasing these jets to the Air Force. And I then started digging into who owned that. And I had to go back to 7 different shell companies until you came to who actually owned it, which was a hedge fund called Polygon, a hedge fund which Forbes magazine, the magazine of the super wealthy and not exactly a left-wing publication, a hedge fund which Forbes magazine called a moral disgrace and a shame to the hedge fund industry because of its practices. I've also done more digging since, and I've discovered that the asset value, the cost of these jets at the time of the PFI contract was $2.6 billion. And under the terms of the contract, £2.6 billion. Under the terms of the contract, by the time they finish paying in 2049, they will have paid £10.4 billion. We are paying £8 billion in finance charges to the hedge fund, which is providing these aircraft, £8 billion.
Milo Minderbender couldn't even have dreamt of that kind of scam on the British public. Does this change the criminal charge that the activists are under? I mean, were they charged with damaging a Royal Air Force plane, which turns out to be a Polygon plane, and quite a nice little earner? Thank you very much.
Well, again, I mean, whether it will change the criminal charges, I'm not certain. It almost certainly will change the way a jury looks at it. And interestingly enough, of course, the private company has probably just lost its insurance because the government's declared it an act of terrorism. If it were an act of vandalism, it would probably be insured. Most insurance policies exclude acts of terrorism. So all kinds of amusing ramifications here. But I mean, this actually really is awful when you think of it. There are 15 aircraft under this contract, 9 of which are permanently with the RAF, one of which is, I think, on a separate contract for the Falklands. And then 5 of them are available on demand to the RAF, but may be leased to other militaries. And what's interesting is to discover whether they have actually been working for the Israelis directly or have been paid for by the RAF when they've been servicing the Israelis. And we don't know the answer to that at the moment. That's something we need to dig into.
You are a national treasure, Craig. This is mind-bending, if Milo will forgive me. I want to ask you something else. It's a bit left field. Forgive me, I didn't prepare you for it. Did you have on your bingo card, as a former Foreign Office official, a very high-ranking one, that MI6, the intelligence service which reports to the Foreign Office, would appoint as its new director the granddaughter of a Jew-murdering, torture-enabling, rape participant of Jews during the Holocaust in Ukraine, would be elected as the new director of MI6. Personally, I feel that even the James Bond movie franchise would balk at a plot twist like that one. What say you?
No, it's astonishing. And one of the extraordinary things about this, of course, was it was published at great length in the Daily Mail, of all places. And the Daily Mail is one of those many media outlets which has spent the last 2 years denying the existence of Nazis in Ukraine. So this is a very embarrassing piece of counter-narrative for them. But also, I mean, apparently the lady never knew her grandfather, so can't hold it entirely against her. But I do understand that she worked with alongside Mossad in the Middle East quite extensively, was involved in technical development with Mossad, including with Palantir and Pegasus. And my source tells me my source said that's definite. They said whether or not she was involved in the technical development for the pager attacks in Lebanon, they did not know for sure. And they couldn't say definitely. They thought probably on that one. But one thing they said was definite was that she was recommended to Lamy, who makes the appointment, but she was recommended to Lamy by Mossad. She wasn't the expected candidate to get the job. So that's really quite interesting. She's somebody with a long history of working alongside Mossad in the Middle East and a lot of involvement with the Israelis, which is why Lamy appointed her.
Yeah, I take your point entirely that, the sins of the grandfather can certainly not be visited on the granddaughter, though from what you say, she may have racked up quite a few sins herself. But you know the Foreign Office. If somebody's grandfather had been a KGB colonel in the Second World War, they would not have made it onto the shortlist for Director General of MI6, would they?
No, I mean, I almost didn't get into the Foreign Office at all when I first joined. I had 3 months while they did extended vetting on me, not because of my political views, but because my father had a minor criminal record. And for that reason, they weren't certain whether or not I should be allowed into the FCO. It was a very minor criminal record of theft. So, if my father having a very minor criminal record of theft is a barrier, having a relative who's actually a mass murderer and mass rapist, you would think would be more of a barrier, but evidently not.
The point you make is a good one, that those people who told us that we were inventing Ukrainian Nazis, we were inventing it as a Putin talking point, are now having to come to terms with the fact that the head of MI6's grandfather murdered Jews and boasted about it during the Holocaust, raped women, Jewish women, in Ukraine during the Holocaust, and was known as, in official documents, the butcher. It is mind-boggling. Now, I read, I don't know if it's true, that this didn't come up at her interview, and so she didn't think herself to mention it. Is that even remotely possible?
I guess it is. I'm not. I'm not sure. But I'm going to tell you the story of my last positive vetting interview, which I passed, I should say, before I eventually left the Foreign Office, where the an MOD colonel conducted the interview, and he had a dossier in front of me. And he said, yes, I see there are some concerns that you like a drink and you've had a number of girlfriends, he said. Then he looked at me and he said, which is unusual for the Foreign Office. It's normally small boys, he said. and at the time, I thought he was joking. I now realise he wasn't.
No, absolutely not. Now, you and I are done certain, Ash. You worked in the Foreign Office. I've opposed it all my life. Have you ever known a worse Foreign Secretary than David Lamy? One completely bereft of political integrity or intellectual heft or any kind of record at all. It used to be the second job in the state. If he's the second top man in our state, we're in big trouble, Craig.
That's very true. It's very hard to see what his supposed qualifications are. And I mean, the people who were my contemporaries in the Foreign Office are now at the top of the Foreign Office. And I still have friends there. And one thing I can tell you for sure is that there's never been a more disliked Foreign Secretary than David Lammy. He's overtaken David Owen, I think, as the most obnoxious person to ever hold the job. But he's personally rude. He's unpleasant to staff. He's particularly unpleasant to junior people, to people working for him, doing minor tasks around his office. He's arrogant. He's not pleasant to visitors. His knowledge base, he has to be told everything, as though describing to an 8-year-old child, and in describing to him the situation in countries in Africa, for example, you have to be very, very careful to make sure he grasps which country you're talking about and where it is. Things which normally you expect a foreign secretary to have some hold of. So it's very difficult. But unfortunately, I mean, this is a trend across the Western world, isn't it? Where, and again, as you say, we're not in the prime of youth, but we've seen a lot, and what we've seen is a tremendous decline in the political class across the Western world.